Hi everyone, and welcome to The Hash, your daily beat on crypto news and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and I'm delighted to be your co-host today, joined by our other wonderful co-hosts. We have privacy reporter Ben Powers, Jen Sanasi, journalist and CMO of Streambed Media Works, DeFi King Will Foxley, CoinDesk managing editor Zach Stewart. Welcome to the show, guys. This is exciting.
Woo!
Hello, hello, hello.
We made it.
First show, doing it.
We made it. I'm so stoked. We have so much exciting stuff to cover in this. Like, if we had to pick a perfect day to launch this show, so much has happened. So let's get right into it. You want to start us off there, Zach?
Yeah, of course. Well, we got to talk about the big news of the day, which is obviously Tesla buying $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and also saying that it would accept Bitcoin as payment for some of its vehicles, which is kind of interesting. We were just chit-chatting a little bit ago, and all credit to Naomi on this one. She's got the OG mindset on this, and she remembered that way back in the day, in 2013, someone bought, was it a Tesla Model S with Bitcoin? Is that
That's right? So when this news came out, everyone was like, they're now accepting Bitcoin. I was like, didn't they already? But turns out they didn't. It was just like one dealership that accepted Bitcoin for Tesla. But it's pretty cool that they're now considering accepting it. I mean, I think that's awesome news.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think this is like probably in keeping with like a micro strategy play, right? Like this is about putting some cash reserves into Bitcoin to, float the treasury going forward as people in this space are concerned about inflation and USD being a bad asset for your treasury. Will, I wanted to throw this to you because I think, there is an interesting take here. Do you think that the payments angle is going to click with Tesla, or do you think it's going to remain, a treasury asset, a Michael Saylor-esque ploy to keep the treasury robust?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that we're just not going to see that develop for a little bit just because of the tax laws. The US has basically taxed every other currency out of existence since the 19th century, I think. We just have those tax laws set up, and it's not going to be any different from Bitcoin, even if you can purchase a Tesla with it.
So the idea here is that, as the specter of inflation looms large, companies like Tesla and others that are potentially, helmed by meme lords and maybe not meme lords will dump Bitcoin as a treasury asset. Naomi, where do you see this playing out from here? That's kind of my next big question.
I mean, I was always on the let's use this every day for peer-to-peer cash. Like back at 2013, I'm doing lots of conferences. Every place that I went to, I would try to find a place that accepted Bitcoin, and there were lots of them, right? And then it disappeared. I got really sad about that because I was like, this is not what it's meant to be. But then you had all these other currencies develop that were doing that. And then Bitcoin became this really robust, as you said, treasury reserve asset. And at the moment, honestly, I don't care that there are $12 transaction fees. If we're talking about people moving billions of dollars worth of this stuff. Like if this is meant to just be a treasury reserve asset, it's doing a pretty great job right now with MicroStrategy and Square and Tesla all piling in. I think that this is just the beginning of what we're going to see is Bitcoin just, completely blossoming and becoming a safe bed for people in an age of, economic instability.
And obviously this comes, I forget how many days after Elon seemingly trolled the world by putting Bitcoin in his Twitter bio. And now I guess we see why he may have been so keen on doing that. Jen, I want to throw this to you. What do you think this does for public perception around Bitcoin? Here's a highly known tech mogul who is betting big on this stuff. What do you think is going to happen in terms of public perception?
Yeah, well, I mean, for the last few days, we've been talking about Bitcoin and other crypto assets just becoming really mainstream this year. And I think this just kind of pushes us more in that direction. I was actually thinking about you, Zach, when I was reading the story. You're so good at predicting trends when it comes to this kind of thing. Who do you think the next Tesla is going to be? Who is buying the next $1 billion worth of Bitcoin? Who do you think that's going to be?
Oh my goodness, I got to get out the tarot cards for this one. Who is going to buy the next $1 billion in Bitcoin? What if Jeff Bezos left the helm of Amazon to just go all into Bitcoin maximalism? Let's throw that name on the board. Awesome. Let's get that one out there. Jeff Bezos is the next big Bitcoin whale to emerge in the coming weeks.
It's on the record.
That is pure rumor, pure speculation. I should state that clearly right now.
I know nothing.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, though, Jen. I appreciate that.
I'm sorry.
Can we get some other bets at least? Can we get a pool going here? Ben, I don't know. Apple. Who else are we talking about? Who else are we talking about here as the next company to maybe kick the tires on Bitcoin as a treasury asset?
I mean, look, and seeing all this happen and seeing Elon kind of, lead this charge into the mainstream in some ways, my question is kind of not which company is going to do next, but how does this benefit individual users? Like if the price of Bitcoin goes so high that somebody's trying to get into it at this point, like how are they feasibly going to do that in any way that actually leads to more mainstream adoption rather than an asset store? So that's sort of my immediate takeaway from this. We're seeing the price charge up yet again, new all-time highs, but what does this mean for some of the smaller players on the ground that weren't in on this, 8 years ago?
And also, what does this mean for the legality of Bitcoin, right? Sorry, stepping on you there, Zach. I think that now that we have so many giant players involved who are very powerful, who have a lot of resources, I mean, it was always on the table, like, is Bitcoin later down the track going to get banned? Is this something the government's going to suddenly say, oh, we're a little bit scared of this, let's just end it? Now you have so many people in powerful positions who could lobby for cryptocurrency, who are involved with it. I just don't see it happening anymore. What is your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still an open question, right? Like, it would be really difficult to shut down the Bitcoin network. But, we've seen interesting developments in Nigeria over the last few days where banks that are touching cryptocurrency accounts by way of their customers were sort of mandated to shut down access to those accounts. So there are certainly, while Bitcoin itself is certainly censorship resistant, there are other levers that I think major powers can use to exert pressure on the ability of folks, large and small, to use Bitcoin however they please. I think the interesting thing also with this big Musk buy is, how did they do that without, moving markets? How did they do that without folks seeing? And I think my hunch, based on some past reporting that, that we've done on Coinbase and MicroStrategy, where Coinbase sort of has, facilitated the large Bitcoin buys that MicroStrategy did. And they even sort of produced a playbook or a guide that sort of laid out how it is they were able to execute such large buys without materially affecting the price. So I think that's something that in the immediate term, aside from sort of the broader ramifications that we at CoinDesk might be looking to track down. Speaking about the broader ramifications and broader awareness as cryptocurrency approaches the mainstream, I think we're going to talk about the Super Bowl now. The Super Bowl was yesterday. It's the Monday after the Super Bowl. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won. I didn't actually watch the Super Bowl, I have to confess. So I missed the game. I missed the commercials. I know nothing. I know that Tom Brady won, but that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna toss it to our local sports desk reporter, Will Foxley. Can you tell me what was the score, and then why we're talking about this as it relates to cryptocurrency? I think we're talking about it as it relates to cryptocurrency. Is that right?
Zach, I'm never talking to you about sports again. You didn't watch the Super Bowl. Yeah. So yeah, a lot happened yesterday. Naomi, I think you kind of teed up the conversation really well, talking about banning Bitcoin. Well, we're already seeing banning of certain communication lines all across the world. But first, we're going to move on over to Reddit and look at this ad that they threw up during the Super Bowl, and then kind of pair it with how Clubhouse is being banned in China. So take a look at this ad.
Whoa. So
Yeah, it was a 5-second ad, which is really short. But basically what they did is they took a post from their subreddit, Wall Street Bets, which obviously has been the conversation for the last 2 weeks, and they threw it up and said, congrats on, destroying the market. Wink, wink, not really. They're saying congrats on their product and for people using their product effectively, which is in itself very interesting, looking at how large corporations have created these digital communities online, and now they're using them and promoting them. Pair that with Clubhouse, which is a new popular conversation app that kind of rolled out in the spring, last spring 2020, but it has just been banned in China because some of the conversations in there are not in the interest of the Communist Party over in China. So Naomi, I want to move that over to you and see what you think about some of these new tools for communication, and then maybe compare them with Bitcoin.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that it's a necessity to see decentralization of social media, decentralization of communication platforms. You saw everyone, as soon as WhatsApp rolled out their new privacy policy, everyone moves to Signal. That's all well and good. I love Signal. Snowden loves Signal. It's still centralized. The government can still, use leverage points to try to force things. Are they doing it yet? We don't know, because there are things called national security letters, gag orders, secret subpoenas we don't hear about. So I think that the future is decentralization of all of these things. And you've already started to see some, alternatives out there. I use Library, which is great. They have a decentralized backend. I use the peer-to-peer app on it, but they also have a couple of different alternatives for front ends. You could use Odyssey, you can use Library TV. I think that sort of thing needs to become more popularized, because we are seeing just mass censorship. We are seeing, it's not just in China, it's in the United States, with apps getting shut down, with, coordination across different platforms. You've got AWS, you've got all kinds of different platforms, like Apple Store, the Google Play Store. They just kick off certain apps. I mean, these sort of coordinated attacks, like, it's all fine and to say, well, I didn't like the app anyway, I didn't like what they're doing. But what happens when the next one comes along and you're like, actually, I did kind of like that one, and they were still able to censor it all, right? So I think that we definitely just need to decentralize this whole thing, so that we can continue to have discussions, freedom of speech, all of that wonderful stuff.
Naomi,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask Naomi, when we talk about decentralized social media platforms, what happens when we think about things like hate speech? How do those things get monitored on decentralized platforms? Do they get monitored?
That's a great question. I am very much against laws against hate speech, because I believe that if you don't believe in freedom of speech for people you disagree with, then you don't believe in freedom of speech. If you're deciding what's hate speech and what's not, then you have to have someone up the top who's making that call. Who do you trust to make that call? Everyone has an agenda. Everyone has their own value system. And of course, there's some speech out there that is horrendous. There are people that I listen to and I'm just like, that's so awful. Like, you should not be saying this in public. You're a bad person. People should hate you for this. There should be repercussions. At the same time, I'm not going to say, well, you could never say that stuff, because I think that the repercussions of that is a slippery slope. And once you have one person dictating what can and can't be said, things just go downhill real fast. Ben, do you have a take on this? Because you're a big privacy, freedom of speech, like, you're into all of that. What's your take?
I mean, I think there's a really important tension that plays out here between like speech and content moderation, and sort of as the world's constructed right now, at least in terms of the most popular platforms, these are private platforms. These companies can choose to do what they want, and that is entirely their purview. I think what it mainly hones in on is it helps illuminate some of the power dynamics that currently exist. Naomi, as you talked about, what happens, what might be the next step? What might be the next platform to go down in some of these things. And so, I think we'll get into that more in the next section, but I want to pass it back off to you.
Got it. We are going to throw to a break here at the end of our first segment, and we are going to come back with all sorts of good stuff on the other side of it. We're talking about Apple and more privacy implications going forward. So stick with us. Thanks for joining the Hash, and we'll see you soon.
Welcome back to The Hash, your daily beat on crypto news and culture. I'm going to start off this blog by talking about Apple's new iOS update. Now, the idea is that they want to give permission, they want to enable permissions that users have to select in order for people to track you for advertising, which I think is awesome. So the idea being that there'll be pop-ups that say, do you want this app to be tracking you? And I think that just is a continuation of their fight for privacy on behalf of their users. They've been big advocates of that, but there's been a huge amount of pushback. And recently, you've seen in the news that Facebook has been one of the big companies pushing back against this. They say that this is going to mess with their business model. Obviously, they're a juggernaut that makes all of their revenue through tracking people using advertising, so it makes sense that they don't want it. So while this has been escalating over the past few days, it makes me wonder, you know, we talked earlier in this segment about decentralization of social media platforms. I wonder if we're going to see the next boom be maybe in advertising. We already see Brave starting to decentralize advertising models. Their ultimate aim is to keep all the data on the user side, not track anywhere across the internet, and completely decentralize it and just have like smart contracts connecting publishers with viewers, with advertisers. And so that seems like an exciting world. I'm wondering how much we're going to like head towards that in the future, or how much we're going to rely on big companies like Apple to protect privacy on our behalf. Ben, I'm going to throw this straight to you because you're a big privacy buff. So like, what is your take on all of this?
I mean, my take on all this is that it's going to make, a lot of other companies' jobs much harder. I mean, you saw Snap simultaneously, push back against this a little bit as well, the popular social media company, while also saying, no, we applaud Apple for doing this. And it gets into this tension where you're starting to see concerns about privacy really break out over the last few years and become more of a mainstream position, which is why, Apple's made it a marketing campaign for itself, essentially, why Google's trying to change its cookies in addition. And so, obviously companies whose ad revenues are built on their ability to track you across different platforms aren't going to like this. But I do remember, I was looking at I believe it was related to Brave, but I was kind of a infographic showing all the different decentralized sort of marketing and ad tech solutions. That's yet to be seen how effectively that plays out, but they've just exploded over the last few years. And I think it speaks to the fact that, there's going to be a need to grapple with a new reality, and what the tools that it takes to get there, they're still being developed. They're still being rolled out. There's going to be competition amongst them, but we are starting to see more of a paradigm shift within this field.
Yeah, and I'm personally a Brave user. I use Basic Attention Token. I love that they're trying to cut out the middleman, cut out the central players. Like Google provides a great service, right? But they're this central player, and Brave is trying to decentralize it and give more of the revenue to the people watching. Like, Will, are you someone who uses something like Brave? What do you think of Basic Attention Token? What do you think of the future of blockchain helping the advertising industry in general?
Yeah, I do use Brave. I'm using it right now. I don't use BAT. I don't use a token. I don't necessarily see the point right now, besides maybe getting some BAT and then flipping it into Bitcoin or something else. As regards like the future of these privacy things, I think it really comes back to that famous line from Apple founder. Of course, I can't remember his name right now, but when he's talking about building the first iPod, famously said, like, you need 3 clicks. It has to be under 3 clicks. Steve Jobs, sorry, blanked his name there. But you need 3 clicks, and if it's more than 3 clicks, then no one's going to use it. If it's less, then might be not enough. And you need to keep users engaged. So I think with these privacy solutions, you're going to have to be like a privacy first, or they're going to have to move on somewhere else. So Brave is kind of in that nice spot where privacy is already baked into the cake, and I don't have to go through settings and change a bunch of things to know that they're not tracking me. And it seems like Apple's going that way too. But some of these other platforms that you have to I have to go in my settings and I have to change my privacy rules for the app. Like, that's obnoxious, and you're just going to see users move away from those products just because it's annoying to use. I don't know how much the question of this topic is about privacy as much as just flow of the UX itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, and I think that's and I report on a lot of different privacy tech, and that's a big challenge for a lot of them, right? It really is the user design and how you make this simple, because the way the guardrails are set up currently is for them, to be really easy to use, but to not be private. And so to invert that whole dynamic takes a lot of effort on the part of the user. And that's something that if somebody's working 2 jobs a day or trying to just get by in life, dealing with a pandemic, worrying about, what stimulus package is coming, it's kind of a big ask to ask them to click through multiple things to set up a whole different OS in some of these other areas. So there's a ton of products being developed out there, but I think the UI challenge is going to be a huge one.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if the opt-in part moves the needle. Because I mean, alt take here, like centralization is really convenient. Like it's really easy for me to live in the walled garden of Google with all of my services and all my forms pre-filled and all these little easy tricks of the trade that make my day on the internet much easier. And I think probably most people view it that way. I'm a Brave user as well, but I would say like Google presents itself as a very convenient central point of authority, which obviously has its weaknesses. But I think the convenience, speaking to Ben's point about UX and user interfaces, the convenience is a major feature, I think, for a lot of folks.
For sure. And Ben, you have some other things to say about privacy. Sorry, go ahead.
I do. No, Zach, you mentioned centralization, and that's, their big risks. And as you said, vulnerabilities with Google and some of these huge entities that come with that. A story that really struck me over the weekend was in the New York Times, and it was about how, the United States has lost to hackers and really kind of walked down some of the, long-term effects of the US really focusing on all of its offensive cyber capabilities while not building up the same ones defensively. And now we're seeing that play out in terms of, Russian misinformation campaigns in U.S. elections. We're seeing that play out in, the NSA having its own tools, stolen and used against it. But I think this is also something that really highlights the merging of kind of these weird private-public partnerships where you have, members of firms like Hacking Team, going to Coinbase to help develop products for them before public pushback sort of halted that. You're seeing a variety of other private entities, kind of just have back and forth with the NSA and all these other companies. And so to me, it just showed that, if your data is in a centralized repository, particularly a government one, there's going to be vulnerabilities there. And I think, Naomi, I want to toss this back to you about, does just decentralized architecture help solve some of this? But also, like, what does this rash of hacking mean for users generally?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that, like, systemically, the US government has been trying to make our systems weaker and weaker. So if now we're saying that, oh, we're getting hacked more, like, yeah, of course we're getting hacked more. This is something that comes up in every congressional hearing. This came up in the European Parliament after the Snowden revelations, where they're like, oh my God, the NSA is hacking everything, right? And you have people like, Applebaum, who's saying you cannot systematically weaken our systems, lower the standards of encryption, try to ban encryption through things like the Earn It bill or the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act and all the other things they're trying to push through. I mean, the government fundamentally doesn't understand the trade-off, right? They say that, well, it's a balance between security and privacy. It's like, no. Security is a function of privacy, right? Because individuals are not secure if they don't have privacy. And I feel like right now we've just got the whole conversation wrong. They're trying to weaken everyone's privacy, and by doing that, they take away their encryption, and that takes away their security. So suddenly, it's just makes us vulnerable to hackers. It drives me crazy, man. It drives me crazy. I mean, I would rant all day. Zach, what is your take on this?
What is my take on hackers? Well, do they all wear black hoodies still and like live in poorly lit environments? Because I've seen a lot of the stock photos. That's still true, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and the mask as well.
Yeah, that's important. That's important. As long as we can establish that, I'm cool with what we've accomplished in this conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting the way that other foreign adversaries, quote unquote adversaries, have used hacking to suit their ends. And I think whether or not the U.S. is willing to do that, I think is an interesting question. But yeah, I think the hacking thing is super interesting. I think, like, Ben, you've done a lot of strong reporting on sort of this concept of data honeypots, right? That's what centralization becomes. That's the major risk, right? If everyone's data is in a central repository as opposed to multiple repositories, a hacker only has to break into one of those treasure troves as opposed to multiple. And I think that's the concept that I would like to hear more from you as one of CoinDesk's leading honeypot reporters.
Well, I mean, I think that, we're going to be able to potentially revisit that, but first let's get into a break.
Absolutely. We've, I wish we could talk about privacy all day. It's my favorite, but we have a lot of exciting things to still come. So we're going to take a short break. Up next, we're talking about a new study that's out saying that only 15% of Bitcoin traders are women. Women. We're going to give you our take on that coming up next.
Everyone, you're watching The Hash, where we unpack all of your latest in crypto and culture. Well, Bitcoin reaches a record high today, but a new report by eToro says that only 15% of traders are women. Now, while this is an increase from January last year, the report highlights the massive gender imbalance in the crypto world. And so, Zach, I know I'm always putting you on the spot, but you have a daughter, right?
I do. Yes, that's correct.
So when you hear this, as someone who operates in the crypto world, what is your initial thought?
Yeah, I think the gender imbalance in crypto is really, it's a problem. I think it's a systemic problem. We need to see this number become closer to parity. And I think, hopefully news like Tesla going in on Bitcoin and so like a sequence of all-time highs sort of raises the bar in terms of interest more broadly. And I think that we can move out of this niche concern of early adopter bros and then sort of go toward, the demographics of the mass market. And I think that we're starting to see that, hopefully. But I was pretty depressed to see that this number was still so low, and was a bit shocked by it. I would have guessed it was a bit higher, but I'm curious for your perspective on that, Naomi. I was hoping you weren't going to throw it to one of the dudes.
I'm so sorry that I do this all the time. I know. I want okay. Naomi's perspective next. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
New York Times.
We can
New York Times article. Sorry, points to millennial women just not being comfortable with managing their finances altogether. So I think it's no surprise to see that this number is so low in crypto. Naomi, as the other female on this panel, someone who kind of operates and talks to industry leaders all the time about this, what's your take?
I'm going to provide a little bit of a different take. I think the framing of this whole conversation is wrong, and we talk about it as if it's in terms of discrimination, right, rather than in terms of difference in interests. Like before I became obsessed with economics and technology, I did 2 performance degrees, right? When I was studying musical theater full time, which is overrun with women, I never heard people say, well, this is a systemic issue of gender inequality because there's so many women. Like, how do we get the men involved? It never even came up. So it's always surprising to me now that I'm in an industry that's just filled with men. People are saying, well, it's obviously discrimination. It could just be that, as you said, maybe women aren't as comfortable controlling their finances. Maybe they're just not interested. Maybe they're doing other things. I think specialization of interest is totally cool. I applaud that. Now, if we wanted to reframe the conversation, instead of saying this is about inequality, this is about discrimination, let's reframe it and say, well, this is an important, powerful tool, and we want it to be offered to as many people as possible. How do we show women that it's valuable to them? That's a completely different conversation, and I think an important one.
So does this then come back to the education system? You hear a lot of people talking about the education system and just young girls not being made aware that they can operate in STEM fields, and the enrollment in STEM programs in universities, at least in Canada where I'm from, is really, really low. I believe the female representation is under 10%. Naomi, coming back to what you were saying, do you think that the mere fact that more women aren't interested in this is just because they've been told not to be interested in this from such a young age?
I mean, I hate that narrative so much, and it's so common because